Today's guest on a Life and a Living podcast is Nick Jankel, who is an absolutely fascinating individual. And I loved this interview, and I think you will find it absolutely fascinating. He is the founder of an organization called Switch On Now, which is all in the space of transformational leadership. And you could really refer to him, and he does refer to himself as a transformation geek. I more kindly refer to him as a transformation guru. But he has published a book recently, Now Lead the Change, where he outlines a methodology for transformational leadership. And we talk in the interview about what that actually means, how we can embrace it, and what does it actually, how does it impact yourself as an individual, your environment, the team that you're working with, and the organization that you're a part of. But also, we touched on, what it means to be a transformational leader during these times of COVID, which is certainly a time that is challenging for everyone to navigate. And we also touched on what are the characteristics of that transformational leader, because we all know that in the world where, there is so much change going on, and where there is even so much more change coming down the line, transformational leadership is not just a nice thought, it's an absolute essential ingredient to have, and to be able to perform as a real transformational leader in the world that we're operating in, and with the teams and the people that we're engaging with. So I really do encourage you to sit back and enjoy this really, really interesting interview with Nick Jankel. And I would also highly recommend his book, Now Lead the Change. Nick, thank you so much indeed for being a guest today on A Life and a Living. It's just wonderful to have you, and I appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you for giving me your space.
Listen, it's fantastic. Let's just very briefly maybe give a quick kind of breakdown of the work that you do and your career, just so people can get context.
So super brief. I've always worked in people, understanding people. I wanted to be a psychiatrist, so I studied medicine. Long story short, ended up in what you might call consumer psychology, and understanding customers and where they're going and what to create for them, which is innovation. That pulled me into teaching clients how to do innovation and lead innovation. And that then pulled me into a more complete understanding of leadership development work. It's been a long journey, and yet still kind of doing the same thing I was doing 25 years ago, but hopefully better. Underneath that, although most of what I do sort of daily life is leadership development programs, designing and running personal development programs, all around transformation. Underneath that, I have also been developing a theory and a sort of theoretical underpinning for all this delivery work. And that's
Is that your biotransformation theory and practice? Explain that, because I was just really curious to understand what that is.
It's a labor of love / pain. I'm a geek. I'm a transformation geek. I'm a change geek. And I studied biology and I studied philosophy, and have always tried to underpin my practical work with some depth, something that it rests upon. And I'm kind of allergic to consultants taking an Evening Standard article on some science and then just creating an entire theoretical world based upon misunderstanding a scientific paper that I used to have to study myself. So that was kind of like my allergy. And I guess I'm probably also slightly allergic to my extremely educated friends who are actual scientists and actual, Nobel Prize winning types, laughing at the work I do, because it is in this, transformation, leadership. It's in this fluffy, soft, touchy-feely, tree-huggy, isn't it just all bullshit type domain. And so I wanted to underpin it with everything I could. And that basically comes down to science, neuroscience particularly, but also science of complex systems and that kind of stuff, but also philosophy. So, and I see the transformation, the work I do in biotransformation theory, and you can sort of tell it from the name, it's a mixture, a fusion of the best we know from science about how the brain works, how our biology works, how the gut works, whatever, and the best we know from thousands of years of human philosophy. And what I've tried to do is triangulate where they touch and where you can go, well, that's fairly conclusive that a lot of people seem to talk about, for example, we have two modes of being in our brain. And the neuroscience seems to say that. A bunch of different philosophies seem to say that. So let's imagine that's true. And what do we do with that? So that's kind of summary.
So, I mean, I know that you refer to yourself as a transformation geek. I've also seen you being described, which is a much nicer way, as a transformation guru, which is probably means the same thing in some ways. But when you actually, okay, so you talk about the principles behind it, but when you are in working with the client, firstly, why are they calling you in, and what are you going to do to apply that theory to the individual?
So the specific area of leadership and change that I work in is transformational leadership, transformational change. So we often say to clients, look, if you're looking for sort of mindset upgrade, sort of basic mindset upgrades, basic resilience, basic running your mind better, being more effective, whatever, don't work with us. Work with some other people, particularly if you haven't done anything like this before in your company and your people are fairly unsophisticated in their leadership development journey, then we're probably not the right tool to use. Where we come into our own as a business is where the business is going through rapid change and adaptation. People are struggling, people are overwhelmed, and there's uncertainty, and there's innovation going on, but it may not be very focused. And there's probably some denial of the speed at which the business model is being made redundant. And we are there to help leaders who want to be part of shaping the future of their organization, which includes, on the one hand, very much personal change. How am I going to show up differently? Not just tell people to be innovative, but actually be innovative myself and hold space for innovation and creativity and all the great things like that. Very personal leadership, right up to how do I get a system to change? How do I reach out across my silos, even across outside other businesses into competitors, so that we do a systemic change together? For example, if you're trying to increase the sustainability of your industry, you can't do that as a one company. So that's the kind of journey that I take people on. And I do unashamedly say this is deep, profound work. It's going to change you and your life probably forever, probably change the company forever, hopefully, if I've done my job right. But it's also uber practical. Like, there will be always something specific, as you've said, a ritual, a practice, a tool, a way of talking, a different way of doing a speech sentence, so that you bring something different in the person that you're talking to. And I'm always trying to sort of bring the profound and the practical together, because I don't believe that, it's often said in HR circles that if you do leadership work and it's academic, then that's somehow a terrible thing, because it's somehow irrelevant and theoretical and nonsense. And on the other hand, I think there's way too much sort of leadership work that's actually really management work. It's really about making people efficient, and that's fine. Carry on. It's just not what I'm trying to do. And I think to go beyond,
I agree with you, because I think that, so many people actually have, we use words loosely.
Yes.
And, we talk about leading and managing as if they're the same thing. And they are. I mean, I'm sure that's one of your bête noire, but it is so completely different, and it takes a completely different approach. Just going back in terms of, okay, so you're going into an organization, and one of the reasons to bring is that they want to accelerate innovation within the organization.
Definitely.
I mean, everyone will embrace and say, oh, do I need to be innovative? So, oh, yes, of course I do, right? So it's a motherhood and apple pie, right? So I'm going to, yes. But how do I, if I'm not innovative, how does working with you help me to become more innovative?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll take it in a couple of different ways. So first of all, I help people understand that there are two quite distinct types of innovation in a business, that you need to be probably doing both. But they work differently. And that's actually, I think, because our brain has these two modes that I mentioned, these two networks, brain networks, that work differently. So one type of innovation is sort of everyday improvements, which are about just, taking some time to reflect on something, being a bit more thinking around problems before you try and solve them, taking a break, spending an hour with your colleagues, spending an hour with your customers, kind of every day, trying to get out of just the getting stuff done, firing off emails type mindset. And there was tools around experimentation, hypothesis testing, customer insight, getting into the hearts and minds of others. These are all tools you would use to create a more, let's call it a more innovative culture that's just a bit more experimental, a bit less worried about being shot in the face by the CEO for trying something out and it went terribly wrong. Those are all kind of more around how you create an innovative culture, innovative work style. But the outcomes you're going to get are going to be probably small leaps in existing products, services, processes, business models, but important, super important. And then there's this other kind of innovation, which is actually where you need to hold a group as they interrogate the future of a particular market or customer need type or business model type. And that's what I would call transformational innovation. And we teach both, but they're sort of slightly different systems. And one is every day, and one is, you do actually want people locked away, really looking at what's coffee going to be in the future, what people are going to want in coffee. That's a big question, and you can't do it whilst you're also hammering out 250 emails and developing a project plan for next quarter, blah 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 blah. They don't work well.
Is the method the book that you released recently, the Now Lead the Change? Is that a kind of an outline of the methodology for this transformational leadership? Is that really your kind of manual and playbook for it?
It is. It's quite a big. It's not a one idea written 10 different ways book, which is one type of book in this space. It's 20 ideas written in multiple different ways. And it's a bit about yourself and how your brain works, and about emotional stuff and how it gets in the way of clear thinking, how we break our own creativity, how we stop other people's creativity. And it comes from my work in innovation rather than necessarily my work in coaching or whatever. It comes from how are you going to create adaptation? How are you going to make sure your organization is future-proof? Is the ultimate question I'm trying to answer. And then it does go into this six-stage model from deep inside yourself to right out in the system, and explain. It gives you sort of a map of how to become a leader of a 21st century style leader who has deep inner knowledge and inner wisdom, but also can make big things happen when they need to.
Okay. And if you take it, because, talking beforehand, you and I both do work with some, very big organizations. And one of the things that I'm sure that you've come across is that staying safe, right? Not pushing it out, because, if I'm so innovative that it's so far out there, I could get my head chopped off if this goes pear-shaped. So, there's me trying to be innovative, perhaps within the context of a culture that maybe would say they embrace innovation, but actually their behavior is, no, we reward safe and steady. So how do you kind of, because that's the real world that you're operating in, right? You've got to change. To be innovative in a culture of safe and steady is kind of uncomfortable. So are you in the wrong place? Are you in the wrong organization if you're trying to be that, or can you influence it?
Potentially both. So in my book, I talk about safety and how it's your job to create safety for your team, that way going down to your team. But it's also your job to manage upwards to whoever's the big boss or the biggest boss's boss, to try and bring them into this conversation around, you want us to create a new business model that's $1 billion business model. You're going to need to give us space to make some cheap and safe mistakes, because we know how to do that, because we've got all this experimental tools and prototyping and things. We're not going to spend 100 million and make a mistake. We're going to do that. We really got this. We know how to do safe experiment, but you're still going to have to give us space to think new thoughts, and most importantly, challenge the basic assumptions of the current business model. That's where it really, but that doesn't cost you anything, right? So it's safe in the fact that you don't have to waste any money on this. You're not going to have a Daily Mail article talking about how you challenged assumptions in a workshop. That just doesn't happen, right? So there's actually a lot more space people have to be innovative than they probably think. That's the first thing. And I warn people about the escape fantasy, which is, if I go to Google, then they'll really appreciate my maverick, innovative genius, and everything will be all right. Because as we all know, you got to do the transformation where you're at. You got to have the breakthroughs where you're at. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the company you're with is the right company for you long-term if they speak innovation but don't really want it. And you can see their business model failing and underperformance occurring and diminishing returns, where people are kind of push up accounting profits, but they're not growing the pie, they're not growing need, they're not growing new customer moments, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
And you could probably sell after a while, you know what, if I really want to be part of the future, and that also includes, by the way, being sustainable and regenerative and not just making money, then I'm probably going to have to find a culture that genuinely values X, Y, and Z, but only once I've done my best to bring this company with me. Because there are ways to, and that's one of the things I learned, is you can have an innovation process up the wazoo, but if you don't know how to tell stories and bring people, particularly senior leaders, maybe the CFO, you know, the COO, if you can't bring them with you so they understand this journey and aren't scared of it, and understand there's actually logic and strategy in there. It's not just a brainstorming fiesta of post-it notes. There's logic and strategy and structure in a good innovation process. Has to be, right? Because you're trying to engage with the best knowledge you have about the future.
Yeah, but I think the important thing you're saying there is that the organization has got to give you the if you like, the budget to kind of fail, you know, hopefully on the cheap, and but also the space. And I recently wrote an article, published an article that was kind of, you know, why is it that we're far too busy to have time to think and reflect on strategy?
Absolutely.
And that's got quite a reaction. But if you take the current circumstances that we're in, Nick, and you're looking at, you know, as where organizations are navigating through COVID, which is a challenge. So what does it mean to be a transformational leader as we navigate COVID?
That's another great question. But we said about reflection, you have to give yourself time to reflect, because it's only when you reflect that you can get in the right brain mode to inquire as to what to do about COVID or what to do about the next crisis. Because I think we all have to realize that COVID is one of a number of crises in the next decade that are very, very clear to me. I mean, climate change and its different weird climate weirding outcomes, whether it's floods or moldy houses or whatever it is, it's just so big, so huge. We've also got economic headwinds, and we've got systemic issues around capitalism and globalization, which aren't going anywhere, around how we make them work for a lot more people, because otherwise we're going to have political instability for the next eons, and we know that causes so many problems for everyone. So one of the things I say slightly tongue-in-cheek, which is, if you think you can get out of this sort of set of challenges, which I call a triple threat, by retiring to somewhere and taking out your money and whatever, no one gets out of this, right? So the first thing to remember is we all have to step into this adaptive reality where we have evolutionary pressures to change. And in some ways it's kind of enlivening, because in many ways a lot of companies have sort of hidden away from evolutionary pressures. So as an entrepreneur, I'm always dealing with new things I have to deal with and new competitors doing cool stuff and whatever, right? But if you're in a big company, you've probably been able to get away with just doing your product bit in your business unit for quite a long time. And no one's really said to you, you know, we're on a survival mission here because we, you know, it's fight or sink or swim here. So in some ways, this is a great thing, because it means we can all be back into realizing that institutional boundaries don't stop evolution. And we all have to evolve everything we do. Whether it's, you know, what paper we use for the printer, right up to how we, you know, hire and fire and develop products and whatever. So I think the first thing to remember is this is exciting. There's an excitement here. And often when I do a keynote or program, I say, you know, who's terrified by the way? Everyone goes, yeah, yeah. And I said, who's excited by the way? Everyone goes, yeah, yeah. Exactly. Isn't this amazing? We get to live in these interesting times on the edge of our capacities, right? As human beings, on the edge of our consciousness. That's the first thing I think, is to remember there's an opportunity here for growth. An opportunity for excitement in maybe jobs that haven't been that exciting. They've been safe, but they haven't necessarily been that exciting. So there's definitely excitement here. We can bring purpose into this. There's meaning, because obviously we've got business problems to solve, but we've also got social and environmental problems to solve.
Absolutely, yeah. And
somewhere in the middle there's a win-win for everyone, which I call in the book a triple win. A win for me as an individual leader, a win for my company, and a win for the world. And that's amazing to be able to spend the next 10, 15 years trying to solve problems that are potentially a win-win-win.
And that's a challenge. I mean, but I mean, you're right. It is exciting. I think that's the other things that I see as being really exciting in the workplace is the generation that's coming in
Exactly.
to the workforce. You know, it's a very different dynamic, and I think the challenges for many leaders is for those same leaders to understand that generation and how you are going to grow, evolve, and develop that generation. But if you're looking at the kind of the transformational leader, Nick, I mean, what are the characteristics of a transformational leader?
Actually working right now on we have a 12 qualities and 12 skills, 12 skills of a transformational leader that we measure people on and see whether they change over programs and periods. And they relate to these 6 sort of big buckets: conscious leadership, purposeful leadership, creative leadership, collaborative leadership, inspirational leadership, so that's bringing people along, storytelling, and then systemic regenerative leadership. So they're kind of the challenge with being a transformation leader is you have to be really good at you and managing your moods and managing your beliefs and your fears and your anxieties and your courage, emotional courage, a huge big deal, to step in and go, I don't think this is going to work long term, or this business model is basically dead, what are we going to do next? So that's very much about you. Then you have to be really good at dealing with people, the people who work for you, the people who are your report, you know, the 12-year-old intern and the 22-year-old new grad, and your customers, right? You have to still keep connected to those customers because they are who you exist for. Always easy to forget that, particularly if you've been away from customer service for a long time. And then and you have to also be really good at world stuff. Like you've got to understand what these threats coming along and how that's going to affect your strategy and how your strategy is going to work in a climate change 2-degree blah 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 kind of world. So it's a lot, and it's a lifetime's job. And I don't profess anyone to be a perfect transformation leader. I certainly don't myself, but I know I'm working on these edges all the time, you know, in every moment, whether it's a micro moment of an email that I could just tweak it and make it land a little bit, you know.
But you can't ever get the completed job because you're working in a dynamic world. It's changing so fast. So the requirements,
the principle, right, is that you are always adapting because the world's adapting.
Yeah.
And that's just, and be okay with that, to be okay as a work in progress.
Yeah. And be comfortable in yourself in that.
Absolutely. But we live in a world where we've been taught there's an answer and there's a perfect stage. I am the transformational leader. I made it. And this doesn't exist. It's just more transformational than last year.
Yeah, we're all work in progress.
We are. Yes.
And as long as we're working, that's at least the right part of it.
No, you're right. I mean, I talk about this idea of inner work. As long as we're doing the inner work, which means looking at our pain, looking at our fears, looking at our beliefs, looking at our addictions, including to Facebook or being seen at work 12 hours a day, whatever that addiction is, you know, as long as we're working on that stuff and bringing it into our awareness and reflecting on it, as you've said, then that's it. What more can we do?
Yeah. Just curious in terms of when you're working with somebody, I know this is asking a kind of a general question, but somebody, okay, they want to embrace it. They're working with you. They're working through the program and the methodology with you. What are the typical kind of obstacles or blockages that they crash into along the way? Are they internal ones, external ones predominantly, or which? Or probably both.
One big of one of it. Yeah, definitely both, internal and external. So the internal resistance tends to be the avoidance of what Jung called shadow, you know, the dark parts of us that we don't want to deal with. That tends to be the biggest resistance. I don't really want to go there. You know, I locked that down when I was 23, and you know what? I'm happy it locked down. Oh, I know it's affecting how I deal with my boss, whatever, but you know what? Can't go there. So it's kind of like an internal resistance of repression and denial, which, as you have, I'm sure, worked many times with, is endlessly exciting and interesting to work with, and but it is a resistance. But I think the simple resistance of the workplace is just time. And I think I actually write in my book, this new book, that just the pace of the world we're in is traumatizing. Like our nervous system can't cope with the amount of what you would call in trauma shock that is dealt with on an everyday basis from just the sheer volume of emails, phone calls, notifications, you know, I've got to breathe now because my app tells me to. Oh my God, I got to email. You know, just it's traumatizing. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough capacity in this brain and this body to deal with it all. So then,
and how do you deal with that? How do you actually? I mean, because I get what you're saying, and I would agree with you. But you know, it's easy kind of say that that's the situation. But what do I do? Because I can't ignore
the
it.
key thing is to own it. First of all, as we know, own it. Don't deny it or push it away. And this is what I personally do, and this is what I try and teach what I actually do rather than some abstract concepts. So I take it very seriously, my own processing time. I just discerned a slightly different processing time from noodling time, which is more that kind of pottering around, reflecting on an idea. But I spend a decent chunk every day working through what happened during the day, usually in some kind of meditation. It can be in a run if I'm, you know, it's a run day. Working through, you know, awkward conversations, a little rush of frustration in me that came up, whatever it is that today's flotsam and jetsam of my psychological world has brought to me, so that I can then hit the next day, cleared away that stuff. So it's now gone from my consciousness. It's not clouding me. But the reason that's so more powerful is because when it's not clouding me, my ideas and my insights are clear again. So I know what to do next. And a lot of people get stuck in indecision, not because this decision's that hard, but they have so much going on in their consciousness that they can't, there's no clarity. There's no sense-making clarity.
Yeah. It comes back to managing yourself again, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Yeah. Mastery of your own, your consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, this is fascinating, and we could go on for a long time talking about it, but I want to respect your time. But question I ask everybody out of curiosity, a book other than your own that you have read that's made a significant impact upon you?
I'll share a book that I read regularly because I go back to it when I'm troubled. If it's 3 a.m. and I'm picking over a business problem, which happens less and less, but it does still happen, I pick up one of the many versions I've got of the Tao Te Ching, the Taoist Chinese sort of basic text by Lao Tzu, who may or may not have existed. And I randomly open up one of the sort of fragments or sort of poems in there, and I let it be my sort of reflection guide for that moment and see what's in it for me. And if the one I read isn't great, I move to another one until I find one that sort of
resonates.
Yeah, of that particular issue or problem.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I've come across that work. And the second one is daily rituals, because one of the things I find fascinating by talking to successful people is that they pretty much all have daily rituals. Now, they can be very different daily rituals, but people are most fascinated by the daily rituals of successful people and what they do for them.
I was going to tell you, I'll tell you about my my coffee making. It's a little ritual there for me in my flat white, in my perfect flat white. I've optimized my flat white. But actually, I'll tell you something more useful. I have learned that without really strong boundaries for myself, I overwork, and there's only one outcome eventually, is some kind of burnout experience. So one of my rituals, because I actually did burn out once, and it's not a nice, pleasant experience. One of the things I'm really strong on is turning off the office, shutting down computers, and then turning off my phone and putting it somewhere away from me, so that my life between, say, 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. is clear of my entrepreneurial and leadership life. So I don't get Slack messages coming in, because I work with people across the world. Right. So I don't get any stimulus where I have to go back into, I'm a boss, I'm a leader, I'm a client servicing dude, where I can be fully with myself and my little people, my children, and nourish myself and regenerate, so that I can then hit another 10-hour day the next day.
And do you hold to that, or is that aspirational?
It is 90% hold.
That's pretty good.
Firm on it now. Yeah, I'm pretty ruthless with myself, because if you open one chink,
oh, you're gone.
With the workaholic, if you open a chink, it's like I imagine like a alcoholic, any form of addiction, right? If you allow yourself a chink, you take a mile. You're
gone.
So
you're gone. Fascinating. Yeah, it's it. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, now that's something that I should get better at, is that boundary piece, because I do find, because again, I'm like you, I work with people in different time zones, right. So you're constantly, and yeah, it's not right. I mean, I know
it's too much, right? It's too much for us.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Yeah. Nick, this has been fantastic. We will put all the information and the reference to your book, Now Lead the Change, in the show notes, and also your contact details. But somebody listening, how can they get in touch with you?
So website, switchonnow.com. And there's a new open program for leaders if you want to check it out on transformational leadership. But if you want to get hold of me specifically, just put in my email and email me, nick@switchonnow.com.
Perfect. Nick, thank you so much for being a guest. I'd love to come back and have another conversation because there's certainly plenty of content that we could dig into there. But in the meantime, thank you so much.
Thank you.